Well, good morning. I thought I would do an update journal of awakening. It's been around about 2 months since this shift happened, and it's continued really unabated. And the past 2 months have been a succession of realizations and changes in behavior that have just seemed to occur spontaneously, really. Um, I I changed my eating habits and started after a while. I started fasting also, and so my weight is dropping quite rapidly. I've been out of the house every day, walking. Um, I feel I need to be outside, um, interacting sometimes with people, but also interacting with nature. And I, I'm tending to choose um, the most the routes that are most distant from any traffic, and I'm avoiding even walking down to the village. There's a village about 2 miles down the road. I speak of a village. I live in a conurbation, but Birmingham has a very quaint and distinctive division into centres, perhaps because of the way that the city was created out of almost nothing. I suppose all cities were created out of nothing. I've had some spiritual revelations. That probably the most significant one is that I've finally realised that the church is the opposite to what the Bible teaches, and so that's made me drop out of any church activities. And I'd already stopped attending church, but I was attending um, uh, simply a meal, um, a breakfast and meal or cup of tea that was being offered in the premises of the local Methodist Unitarian assembly. And so I was mixing with church people. I mean, when I say church people, I just mean people who go to church, frequent those environments. And I realized gradually, every time I engaged with somebody or started listening to somebody, I would soon realize whether or not they were still attending church by the way they spoke. Um, so my understanding is that as believers we are to remove ourselves from any church, not to be haughty, but to protect ourselves, because there are some very strong spirits roaming the earth, and the church is a very dangerous place to spend any time. Now that was quite a major revelation for me in terms of my philosophical understandings, which have been developing over the years, I suppose. And then I've been introduced to practices such as breathing through my nose, which is something that I have never been accustomed to, I think. And my mouth breathing has caused all sorts of problems over my life. And I'd never realized how important this matter was. But again, with the awakening and everything that's going on, I found myself wanting to and deliberately focusing on my breathing. And then I started looking into breathing, and I haven't really done a very thorough job of it yet, but I do believe I have read words to to the effect that control of one's breathing can produce altered states of consciousness. And this makes absolute sense to me now. So I'm breathing consciously, whether I'm breathing well or wrong or poorly, I don't know, but I'm certainly focusing my attention on my breathing. Apart from the weight loss, I walk and I'm seeking out the hilliest routes I can find because I feel the need to increase my stamina and to strengthen my muscles. And I will be proceeding with upper body strength in the next few months, if the Lord will allow it, because I have a lot of heavy lifting to do for jobs around the house, and I do have some weights also that I might start to lift up and down from time to time, although I don't really enjoy doing that so much. So I'm expecting to see just a general hardening of my body and a strengthening of my muscles as the fat melts off, which is happening at a pace that I don't seem to be able to control it. I'm not following any particular plan. I eat when I'm hungry, and I try to choose varied foods, avoiding anything really processed or synthetic. But apart from that, eating fairly freely. I will say that I've avoided wheat lately because I think it might be difficult to process in my current fasted state. Semi-fasted, I suppose you'd have to say, although some days I don't eat. Other spiritual revelations that have come to me is this matter of the connection between men and women, and the reason why, as men, we need to have our assemblage point shifted at a certain point by a woman, because in a manner of speaking, only a woman can set a man free, and only a man can set a woman free, although I'm not talking about necessarily marriage. It's a spiritual freeing that men and women can do for one another, and it's different for men and for women, because women set men free of themselves and their self-importance, whereas a man can set a woman free of her bondage of I suppose I don't know quite how to describe it, because it sounds as though I'm saying a bondage of freedom, but the woman's problem is an absolute excess of freedom that has no bounds, and a man can deliver confines, but not so as to box in the woman, but to allow her to express the power, the intrinsic power of womanhood, and her spiritual power in the world. It's rather like having to push against something, you see. I mean, you can be the strongest man in the world, but if you're floating in a vacuum, your strength has no meaning. You need to put your feet on the ground and put your back to the wall, and to give yourself a handhold in the world. And women can do that by the action of a man only. It's a man's role, shall we say. You could say to ground a woman, perhaps, and it's a woman's role to free a man from his self-obsession, because this is what we are as men. that to me is quite an important revelation. The idea of entrapment of spirits by the natural world is another one. I do think that's quite reliable. It's a recent thing that I've understood. So understanding is, or what I presume to be a measure of understanding, and I'm on a path. I don't claim to have any kind of completeness of knowledge. Understanding has been flowing, I think aided by my fasted state. It does tend to clear the mind. My eyesight has been improving because I have stopped wearing glasses whenever possible. And so my eyes are being exercised in changing their depth of focus. And I'm discovering that I can still see more or less without my glasses. I might not be able to recognize people, but I don't really recognize people even when I can see them clearly. It's been a feature of my path in the world that I am not what's termed a recognizer. I'm never quite sure of who anybody is. And I used to feel ashamed of that because people who are good recognizers, that seems like they have a good heart. They have loved the person, and there's some truth in that because it's revealed to me that I have no love of individuals. I have a great love for humanity at large, and anybody that I meet on the street, I just feel love for them. In some measure, because I see them more clearly. But individuals, actual people, I don't care what happens to them or who they are or what they do. Really, it doesn't seem to be any of my business. So I don't differentiate highly between people to set one person above another. In general, I would say. There are a few exceptions to that, but not very many. People that I've walked with for many years, of course, in my life, my wife, my daughter, my sister, indeed. But apart from that, I don't care what happens to people, it's their business. And so I don't focus on them, I suppose. It's my nature, it's my haughtiness that causes me to be like that, I suppose, in a way. But it frees me from sort of the bondage of social norms, I suppose. So I have to stick with my nature. We all have to stick with our nature and adapt to it and integrate it. So is my understanding. I've completely rearranged my home recently and I've made it more comfortable for the first time. I've been here for several years and it's really just been the kitchen and the study where I do my work. But now I've made a small sort of comfortable area. I got a used stereo system off eBay, which is the first time I've had any actual kind of decent sounding recorded music. I've actually gone out of my way. This was something that I grew up with. When I was a young lad, one of the first things that I wanted was an amplifier and loudspeakers and a record player. And I treated myself quite well at the time. I had a very good system. and I had quite a large record collection. I enjoyed listening to different artists. But with digital music, that all, like with most people, I suppose you just go on to listening to things on substandard audio and listening to digital music. But I'm very thirsty these days. I haven't actually at the moment got a record deck, but I'm thinking of getting one. I don't want to spend a fortune, and I haven't got any records at the moment, but I thought I might get a couple so I can go back and have the pleasure of listening to analog recorded music. And I do think that there's a difference. I think there's a spiritual difference, especially if you can go back and get the original analog recordings, because there was a period, of course, when a lot of bands would have been recording on digital equipment and then transferring to analog to press the records. I'm not. I don't like the digital very much, although I'm using it now, of course, and we all use it. I love the way that we're all able to talk to one another. Although whether we understand one another or not is debatable, I suppose, but that doesn't matter. I can listen to people all over the place, what they're talking about. But the actual medium itself seems to me to have some negativity about it, and so it has to be used carefully, or perhaps sparingly. I'm currently on a break from my work. I haven't got any work, which is unusual for me. So I often feel a sense of anxiety when I have no work to do. Not really because of the financial risks that implies. I have a small pension, but it's insufficient to live on, or it would be hard. I'm quite an extravagant man in my expenses. I like to spend my money freely, although I'm prudent. I haven't got much, but I have more than enough. For my needs and more besides. So not working means that I'm away from the screen and I have no distraction from the hum of infinity that lies just outside the bounds of consciousness and breaks through and causes the heart rate to rise in terror. But I have many other activities, thankfully. I'm playing the guitar regularly. I have a lot of odd jobs to do around the home. And so I have to shift my being in a way to focus on being more of a homebody for the time being. And I'm very pleased about that. But I am mindful of the fact that the minute the computer goes ding and a work request comes in, I will be persuaded to shift myself more towards translation work and accept any jobs that are offered, because that's the normal way that I always do as a translator. That's part of the being impeccable in my job, I think. But I have to be sure that I'm at my best when I accept these jobs. If I'm stressed, then that can have a negative impact on the quality of my work. So I have to be quite mindful in the division of time, but so do we all. This is a common problem. All these things can be resolved, you see. This is what I've understood. But they require careful attention. If you apply careful attention to a matter, the solution will come. But applying careful attention isn't quite as simple as it sounds, because we can get in the way of ourselves, in a certain manner of speaking, and confuse ourselves with the world. And they are the same thing, but they're also subtly different, and confuse ourselves and the world with power, with the power of the living God, which is another thing, and stands against that awesome backdrop of eternity that accompanies our every gesture. So the awakening continues. I'm having fun. I have a sense of excitement that I've not had for a long time. I'm thinking if I can get my health to a sufficiently high level, I will be able to contemplate going hiking again, which is something that I did as a youth, and I found it just delicious, just to take off with a few supplies and just start walking somewhere. It was one of the most empowering experiences that I can recall in my youth. I remember walking down to North Devon, Morwenstow, and sleeping on the headland there. It was a warm night, and I was just in my sleeping bag, looking up at the stars and completely alone. It's the most alone I'd ever been, and probably that I have ever been, really, because it was quite deserted throughout the night, with the sea crashing below. I don't know how much sleep I got, but I never forget that night. So I'm understanding that I can do things like that again. I've made a commitment to visit Italy, and it hasn't been shown to me when yet. My favour is going with the springtime, and my preference actually would be to drive there, to avoid all the bother of airports. If I could drive there and take the car on the ferry, then that's probably what I would do. In the old-fashioned way, I used to love going to the continent on the ferry. I'd have a proper meal on the ferry every time. Usually I'd be coming back from Italy, so to have bacon and eggs or some English speciality on the ferry was a great treat. And it was enjoyable sailing in the ocean. And I suppose it's just the channel, but it's quite... the seas, on a couple of crossings, I remember the seas were quite significant, and the ship was rolling and carrying beer across the saloon was really out of the question. I was never sick, but only because the duration was fairly short. I'm sure that if I had to put up with that sort of motion for a long time, I might have to. I would start to feel rather queasy. So I have a sense of excitement, and I think if my powers, my physical powers increase, you see, it would require that. well, I'm 69 years old. I shouldn't, be under any illusion, but I do believe that if I practice correct diet and exercise and all these other things and breathing diligently, I will have. It just follows that there will be a general rejuvenation if the Lord will allow me to live, of course, because my life is indeed in the hands of our Lord and Saviour, Jesus Christ. Praise his mighty name. So there we go, brothers and sisters, whatever your persuasions. I don't know whether anybody, will listen to these things. Some things that get listened to, but some things hardly do at all. It doesn't really matter. And you can't really trust what they say on YouTube, actually. You have to remember that. Something could seem to have one view and it might have a million. And something else could have, say, a million and it's only got a few hundred. They can do what they want, really, can't they? Why not? God bless everybody.